The fluorescent light above Lorraine Pruitt's desk had been buzzing for 3 years. Tobias Renner had counted it. Once when he was 16, he had counted the buzzes during a 40-minute meeting and arrived at 412 before he stopped. That light was the soundtrack of his childhood. Not lullabies, not television. The dry, electric hum of a fixture nobody bothered to fix in a building nobody bothered to love. Today the buzzing felt different. Today it sounded like a clock. Toby sat on the edge of a vinyl chair the color of cold coffee. His knees were pressed together. His backpack rested between his boots. Inside that backpack was every single thing he owned in the world. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a toothbrush, a paperback Western with the cover half torn off, a pair of socks rolled into a ball because the drawer he had been assigned in the group home was too small for them to lie flat. He was 18 years old. It was his birthday. Nobody had said happy birthday. Across the desk, Miss Pruitt arranged her papers with the careful patience of a woman who had handed over the same brown folder 1,000 times before. She had silver streaks at her temples now. Toby remembered when those streaks had only been a single strand. She had been his caseworker since he was 16. Before her, there had been 3 others. Before them, his mother. Tobias, she said, and her voice was that voice. The careful one. The professional softness she put on the way another woman might put on a sweater before opening a cold door. Everything is finalized. As of today, you are no longer a ward of the state of California. You are an adult. She slid a thick brown envelope across the desk. It came to a perfect stop in front of him. Your birth certificate, your social security card, a cashier's check for $21,241. That is the total balance of your state-managed savings account accumulated through your earnings and the small stipends paid into your name over the years. Toby looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. $21,000. He tried to make the number feel real. He tried to picture it as a stack of bills, a thing you could hold. He could not. It was a string of digits on a piece of paper the way his life had been, a string of dates on a chart. Removed from custody, placed in temporary shelter, transferred to group home, reassessed, reassigned, aged out. There's something else, Miss Pruitt said. She reached into a lower drawer. The drawer creaked. She lifted out a second envelope, and this one was different. The first envelope was crisp, clean, modern. This one was the color of weak tea. The corners were soft. The paper had the texture of something that had been touched many times, then put away, then touched again. She placed it gently on the desk between them. This was left in your file 8 years ago, she said. It came with very specific instructions. It was to be delivered to you on your 18th birthday. Only on your 18th birthday, and only if on that day you were not in the custody of your mother. Toby's throat closed. He felt the slow heat of the buzzing light on the back of his neck. Your grandfather arranged it through a family law attorney in Bakersfield. The arrangement was prepaid. The conditions were ironclad. His grandfather, Walt. The word grandfather was a small word for a man Toby barely remembered. He had a few flashes, a pair of hands so callous that when they touched his cheek, they felt like sandpaper wrapped in love. The smell of cut pine and machine oil, a laugh that came up out of a chest like a slow engine starting. That was all. The man had died when Toby was 10. A year later, his mother lost custody and the system swallowed him whole. He had not heard the word grandfather spoken in 8 years. He picked up the envelope. The paper was soft against his fingers. There was no return address. Just 2 words written in a careful, shaky scrawl across the front. For Tobias. He opened it slowly. He did not want to tear it. There was something in the way the paper had been preserved that made tearing it feel like a sin. Inside 2 things. A heavy brass key, the kind of key a man kept on his belt because it was too important to live in a pocket. Old, worn smooth in the places a thumb would press it, in a single folded sheet of yellow legal paper. Toby unfolded it. The handwriting was the same shaky scrawl as the front of the envelope. Tobias. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst thing I prayed against has come to pass. You are alone, and you have nobody, and the world has forgotten you. I am sorry. I am sorrier than these old hands can write. I have left you something. It is not much by the world's measure. It is a piece of land out in the Mojave. There is a barn on it. The deed has been transferred to your name. The county filing fee was $4. I paid it the week before I died. The land is yours, Tobias. The barn is yours. They are small things, but they are yours. Nobody can take them. This key opens a box. The box is under the third floorboard to the left of the main barn door. What is in that box is the real inheritance. It is not gold. It is not money. It is the truth. Read everything. Read it slowly. Then decide. Do not let them take the land. It matters more than it looks. I love you, son. I have loved you every day since the day you were born, and I will love you on every day that comes after I am dust. Be strong, Walt. The page shook in Toby's hand. He realized after a long moment that it was not the page that was shaking. It was his hand. He set the page on the desk to keep it still. Nobody had called him son in 8 years. Nobody had said the word love and meant it. The two words sat on the page and they pressed on his chest like two flat stones. He wiped his face with the back of his wrist. He did it quickly so that Ms. Pruitt would not see. She had the dignity to look down at her papers anyway. $4, he said. His voice was not his own. $4, she said. It's listed on your transfer documents. The deed is in your envelope along with a hand-drawn map. The property sits about 5 miles outside a town called Amboy in San Bernardino County. It is, I should warn you, very remote. There is no electricity on the parcel, no running water. From the satellite images on file, the structure is in poor condition. She paused. She looked at him, and for a single second, her professional softness slipped, and Toby saw something raw underneath. The face of a woman who had watched too many children walk out of her office into a world that did not deserve them. Tobias, she said, you don't have to go there. You have $21,000. You could rent a room in Bakersfield. You could enroll in a trade school. You have options. The land is just a piece of paper if you decide it is. Toby looked at the brass key. He turned it over in his palm. It was warm now from the heat of his hand. He wanted me to go, he said. He wanted you to have a choice, she said. He nodded. He did not argue with her, but he had already decided. Somewhere in the bottom of his chest, in a place he did not have words for, he had decided the moment he saw the handwriting. He had a grandfather. He had a man who had loved him from beyond the grave. He had a piece of dirt in the desert that was his, and only his, and no clipboard could move him out of it on a Tuesday morning. He stood up. He put both envelopes into his backpack. He shouldered the bag. Thank you, Ms. Pruitt, he said. She stood up too. She came around the desk. For a moment, Toby thought she was going to hug him, and his whole body went stiff because nobody had hugged him in so long, he was not sure he remembered how to be hugged. But she only put a hand on his shoulder, a light, brief, professional hand. Tobias, she said, be careful out there. The world is harder than people tell you, and you have a good heart. Don't let anyone take that from you. He could not answer. He nodded once and walked out. The hallway smelled of floor wax. The county building's front doors hissed open, and the California afternoon hit him in the face like a slap. Sun, traffic, the whole indifferent city moving on its way as if nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He walked to the Greyhound station with the brass key in his front pocket where he could feel it press against his thigh with every step. The bus to Amboy left at 4 in the afternoon and did not arrive until 6 the next morning. 14 hours of road. Toby took a window seat in the back. He kept his backpack on his lap. He watched California unspool. The city went first. The sprawl of Los Angeles pressed up against the bus window, then thinned, then turned to suburbs, then to towns with one stoplight, And then the towns gave up, and there was only land. Brown land, land the color of an old saddle, land with no fences because there was nothing left to keep in or out. The hills flattened, the sky widened, the Joshua trees began. He had never seen them before. They stood up out of the earth with their arms thrown open, twisted and patient like men who had been waiting in line at a counter for 100 years and would wait 100 more. Night came. Other passengers slept. The bus rocked. Toby did not sleep. He held the key. He read the letter again under the dim overhead light. He read the part about love. He read the part about the box. He read the part where Walt called him son. He read it 3 more times after that. By the time the sky turned gray over the Mojave, Toby was a different boy than the one who had walked out of Lorraine Pruitt's office. He was 18 years old, and he had a destination, and he had a key, and he had a man who had loved him. For the first time in his life, he was not just being moved. He was going. Amboy was less than a town. It was a wide spot in a 2-lane highway, a crooked post office, a gas station that looked like it had been built when men still wore hats, a motel with no cars in the lot, and a sign whose neon had not glowed in decades. The bus stopped only because Toby asked it to. He stepped down. The driver gave him a look. The look said, "Son, are you sure?" Toby nodded. The doors hissed shut behind him. The bus pulled away in a slow blue cloud of diesel, and then the silence came in. He had never heard a silence like that. It was a silence with a shape. It pressed against his ears. The wind moved across the highway, and somewhere far off, a tin sign creaked, and that was the whole world. He walked into the gas station. Behind the counter sat a man so old he looked carved. Toby bought a gallon of plastic jug water, 2 bags of beef jerky, a plain ball cap to keep the sun off, and a small pocket knife. The old man rang it up without a word. He took Toby's cash and counted the change twice slowly because his fingers shook. "Vance Road," Toby said finally, 5 miles north. The old man looked up. His pale eyes flickered with a moment of something. Recognition, maybe, or pity. "Renner Place," he said. It was not a question. Toby felt the brass key burn in his pocket. "Yes, sir." The old man nodded once. He pointed with 2 fingers the way a man points who has been pointing the same direction his whole life. "Behind the motel," he said. "Dirt cuts off. Just keep walking. You'll see the barn over the rise. Nothing else out there. Thank you." The old man paused. He looked Toby up and down. He looked at the soft, pale skin of his hands. He looked at the foster kid backpack and the foster kid jeans. "Boy," he said. "Yes, sir. That land's been empty a long time." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Toby thanked him again and stepped out into the heat. The walk took almost 2 hours. The dirt road was a thin, pale ribbon laid across a brown world. The sun climbed. The water bottle in his pack grew warm. Lizards skittered across the path and froze and skittered again. A hawk turned a slow, lazy wheel high overhead. Toby walked with his head down, watching his own boots make small puffs of dust with every step. He thought about his grandfather walking this same road. He had no way to know if Walt had ever walked it, but he liked thinking it. He liked imagining that the dust under his feet was the same dust that had been under his grandfather's feet, and that somehow in this small, private way, they were walking together. By the time he came over the last low rise, the sun was high, and there it was. The barn stood alone on a flat shelf of land. Behind it, the desert ran clear to a hard blue mountain that looked 30 miles away, and probably was. There was no house, there was no fence, there was no other building of any kind. Only the barn. It was worse than he had hoped, and exactly as bad as he had feared. The wood had gone silver gray. The grain stood up in long splinters like the teeth of a comb. The roof sagged in the middle the way a tired old horse's back sags. 2 whole panels of corrugated tin had peeled off and lay in the weeds, rusted to the color of dried blood. The big front doors leaned crookedly on their hinges. One of them stood half open as if the building had been waiting for him with its mouth ajar. Toby stopped at the edge of the property line. He set his backpack down. He took a long drink of warm water. He looked at the barn. The barn looked back. A piece of him wanted to laugh. $4. Of course, $4. Of course this. Of course the inheritance of an unwanted boy was a wreck in the middle of nothing. The world had given him exactly what the world thought he was worth. But another piece of him, a quieter and stronger piece, took a slow breath and felt the dust settle on his shoulders and thought, this is mine. Mine. Not the state's, not a clipboard's, not a stranger's spare bedroom. Mine. He picked up his backpack. He walked to the barn. The doors groaned when he pushed the half-open one wider. The hinges screamed in a thin, metallic voice that traveled out across the desert and came back as nothing. Inside, the air was a different country. It was cool, dim, cathedral tall. Shafts of dusty gold light cut down through the holes in the roof and stood on the dirt floor like pillars. A million slow specks of dust turned in the columns of light. The smell was wood and thyme, and the faint, clean smell of soil after a desert rain that had not fallen in years. Toby stood inside his barn, and he listened to himself breathe. The floor was packed earth except near the front. Near the front, just inside the doors, there was a section of thick wooden planks. The planks were old. They were dark with the dirt of decades. To the left of the doors, third board. Toby knelt. He counted with his fingers the way Walt had counted in the letter. 1, 2, 3. The third board looked like the others. No handle, no marking. He ran his fingers along the long edge. Dust rose. He found the seam. He took the small pocket knife from the gas station. He worked the blade into the seam. The wood resisted. He worked harder. He set his shoulder into it. The board groaned. It came up with a sudden splintering crack that echoed through the barn like a gunshot. Underneath, in a hollow dug into the cool earth, sat a metal box. The box was olive drab. The paint was scratched. On the front, in stenciled white letters that had gone soft at the edges, were 6 characters. Renner, his name, his grandfather's name, their name. There was a heavy padlock on the latch. Toby took the brass key from his pocket. His hands were shaking again. He had to use both hands to fit the key into the lock. The teeth of the key slid in, turned. Click. The padlock fell open. He lifted the latch. The metal squealed. He set the lid back. Inside the box on top was a thick stack of envelopes tied with twine. Each envelope had a date on it. The dates began in 2006. They went year by year all the way up to 2018. 12 years of letters. Underneath the letters lay a large, flat manila envelope, thick and heavy. Toby set the bundle of letters aside. He lifted out the manila envelope. He weighed it in his hand. It was heavier than paper had any right to be. He tore it open. Cash. Banded stacks of $100 bills. The bands were faded yellow. The bills inside were not crisp. They were used. He counted by tens, then by 20s, then by stacks. His mouth was dry by the time he finished. $10,000. He sat back on his heels in the dust of the barn floor and stared at the money and could not think. He had never held more than $100 at one time in his life. He had never held a $100 bill. The stacks lay across his knees like the body of a small animal, and they were warm, and they were impossible. Beneath the cash, in the bottom of the manila envelope, was one more thing, a folded sheet of graph paper soft as cloth from the years. He unfolded it. It was a drawing, a precise hand-inked engineer's drawing, a cross-section of the barn. He recognized the roofline. He recognized the front doors. But under the barn on the drawing, there was something he had not seen with his eyes. A second level. Underground. A pit dug deep into the earth, its walls lined with thin penciled hatching that meant concrete. A roof angled at the top of the pit, drawn with thin parallel lines that meant glass. Tiny notations in the margins. Drainage. South-facing slope. Thermal mass. At the bottom of the page, in his grandfather's careful hand, two words, Walipini, promise. Toby did not know what Walipini meant. He set the drawing aside. He picked up the first letter, the 2006 letter. He untied the twine. He sat with his back against the rough wall of the barn, in the cold steel ammo box at his hip, and $10,000 in cash in his lap, and the dust turning in the gold pillars of light, and he began to read. My dearest Tobias, if you are reading this, I am sorry. I am so sorry I am not there. I am sorry I will not see you graduate. I am sorry I will not see you become a man. I am sorry your mother has not been the mother you deserve, and I am sorry I was not the man I should have been before this all came down on us. I want you to know one thing first before anything else. None of it was your fault. You hear me, son. None of it. You were the best boy a man could pray for. You were a good boy. Toby pressed the letter to his face. He did not cry. He had taught himself not to cry in front of anyone, and even alone in a barn the lesson held. But he pressed the paper to his face and he breathed it in, and the paper smelled faintly of old pine and machine oil, and for the first time in 8 years he could remember his grandfather's hands. He read on. The letters were a life. They were Walter Renner's life, given to a boy who had not been allowed to know him. Walt wrote about his own father, a man who had drunk himself into an early grave on a wheat farm in Nebraska. He wrote about the day he enlisted at 19 in 1990 because there was nothing else for a boy from his town to do that a man could be proud of. He wrote about the desert, the other desert. He wrote about how he had been a combat engineer in Operation Desert Storm in 1991, how his job had been to clear paths for the men who came behind him, how he had gone forward into places where the sand was full of mines and the air was full of smoke. He wrote about a man named Ray, Sergeant Ray Hollister, the man who had pulled him out of a burning vehicle in Kuwait, the man whose face he saw every time he closed his eyes even 30 years later, the man he owed a life to the way another man might owe a debt of money. Toby read the second letter. He read about coming home. He read about the years of nightmares. He read about meeting Toby's grandmother at a church potluck in Bakersfield. He read about the day Toby's mother was born. He read about a small house and a carpenter's shop and a quiet life that ran for a long time like water in a clean creek. He read the third letter and the fourth and the fifth. He read about his grandmother getting sick, the cancer, the hospital bills, the slow undoing of a savings account that had taken 30 years to build. The way Walt had sold every piece of equipment in his shop one tool at a time while she lay in the bed in the back room. The way she had died in 2003, still holding his hand. He read about his mother, Maeve, the drinking, the men, the pills, the years Walt had tried to bring her back, the rehab places he had paid for, the way she always relapsed, the way the monster always won. He read the sixth letter and his hands were cold. In 2006, Walt wrote, the doctor told me I had cancer. The same kind that took your grandmother. Pancreatic. He told me I had a year, maybe 2. He was wrong. I had 12. I have been a stubborn old man. But the day he told me, Tobias, I knew 2 things. I knew your mother was going to lose you. I could see it in her eyes the way I could see it in my wife's lungs. The monster was winning, and I knew I did not have time left to fix her. So I had to fix you, or at least I had to leave you a way to fix yourself. This piece of land was the only thing I had, free and clear, paid off in 1998 with the last of the money your grandmother and I had saved. We were going to retire here. We were going to put a small house up on the south slope and grow tomatoes and watch the stars. She never saw it. When the doctor gave me my number, I knew this land was your inheritance. But a piece of dirt is not a future, Tobias. A piece of dirt is just a place to be poor in. I needed money, real money. Money I could leave you hidden that no court could touch and no caseworker could spend. I went to see some men in Las Vegas. Toby's stomach went cold. He read on. Walt wrote about Ray Hollister, about what had happened to Ray after the war. about the slow ruin of a good man with bad nerves, about how Ray had borrowed money from people you do not borrow money from, about the $80,000 Ray could not pay back, about how those people had been about to kill him in a parking lot in North Las Vegas in the spring of 2006. Walt had gotten in his truck. He had driven to Las Vegas. He had walked into a back office in a place that did not have a name on the door, and he had sat across a desk from a man who did not give him a name. He had made a deal. He told them he had a piece of land, empty, 5 miles from the nearest road, 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. He told them he was a carpenter and a combat engineer, and that he could build a hidden space in the earth, a space with reinforced walls and a hidden entrance and ventilation, a place where they could keep things they did not want anyone else to find. He offered them a 20-year lease on that hidden space. In exchange, Ray Hollister's debt was to be wiped clean. Ray was to be left alive and left alone, forever. They laughed at him at first. Then Walt wrote they stopped laughing. He spent the year 2006 digging, by hand, mostly because he could not afford to bring in equipment that would draw attention. Sick, coughing blood by the end of the day. He dug out a pit beneath the barn floor, and he poured concrete walls, and he framed a steel door, and he ventilated the space through the hollow of a fake water tank he built out behind the barn so that no one would ever wonder why a vacant property had air moving through it. He finished in November of 2006. The men came. They paid him $10,000 in cash for his trouble. I never spent a dime of it, Tobias. It is in the box with this letter. It is blood money. It is the worst thing I ever did. But it bought your Uncle Ray his life, and it bought you a future. And I will stand before God, and on the God I stand, and I will tell him what I did and why, and I will let him judge me as he sees fit. Toby's eyes burned. He kept reading. Walt explained the deal. The men had use of the bunker for 20 years. After that, the lease ended. They were to remove anything of theirs and never return. The property reverted to him, then to his estate, then to Toby. The men did not know about Toby. They knew only that the owner was a sick old man with no one left. The lease Walt wrote expires in November of this year. Toby checked the date on the letter. It was the last letter. Dated October of 2018, a month before Walt died. The lease had expired last month. Then the diagram Walt wrote, the Wallapini. That is what the drawing is. It is a Bolivian word. It means warm place. It is an underground greenhouse dug into the south slope, roofed with glass, using the heat of the earth to grow food year-round in a place where no food should grow. I want you to build it, Tobias. Take their money, use it, wash it clean, build something in the dirt where I built something dark, and let life grow there, and let it be the answer to what I did. Let it be my apology to God and to your grandmother and to you. Be better than I was. I love you, son. I have loved you every single day. I love you on the day I die, and I love you on the day you read this, and I will love you on every day that comes between this world and the next. Walt. Toby sat in the barn for a long time. The sun moved across the holes in the roof. The pillars of dusty gold light shifted slowly across the dirt floor. He did not move. He read the last letter twice more. He read the part about love 3 times. When he finally looked up, the light had gone red. He stood. His legs were stiff. He walked out of the barn into the long evening. The desert at sunset was a thing nobody had warned him about. The mountains turned the color of old copper. The sky went from pale blue to honey to a deep red that pressed down on the world. The wind died. Everything held still. Toby stood in the door of his barn in his land in his dust, and he watched the sun go down over a country that had taken everything from him and had now on his 18th birthday given him this, a piece of dirt, a dead man's love, $10,000 in blood money, and a choice. He thought about Lorraine Pruitt's voice. You have options. You could rent a room. You could enroll in trade school. He thought about $10,000 and $21,000 and a clean bus ticket and a small apartment in Bakersfield and a job washing dishes and a life so quiet nobody would ever find him in it. He thought about Walt sick and digging in this dirt. He thought about Walt writing a letter every year of those last 12 years. He thought about a man he had barely known who had loved him every day. He went back inside. He did not sleep that night. He sat against the wall of the barn with the letters in his lap and the cash beside him and the brass key in his hand, and he watched the moon throw its cool blue light through the holes in the roof and lay it down on the dirt floor in long pale stripes. He read one line over and over. If he still has any honor left, he will come to you on his own. Do not look for him. Walt had written about Ray Hollister. He had written that after he died, Ray had vanished. That Ray was the kind of man who would feel a debt like a thorn in the foot and would walk on it for the rest of his life. There is a man in Amboy, Walt had written, who owes me a life. I will not tell you his name. I will not point him out to you. If he still has any honor left in him, he will know who you are when you walk through his door, and he will come to you on his own. That is between him and his God, not me, not you. Toby read it again. He folded the letter. He put it back in the box. He closed the box. He set the brass key on top. By dawn, he had decided. He was staying. He was going to build the Walipini, and he was going to find out what it cost a man to grow life on top of a grave. He woke up to the sound of a vehicle in the distance. It was the wrong sound for the desert. It was not the wind. It was not a hawk. It was the steady, low growl of a heavy engine on dirt. He went to the open barn door, and he stood in the shadow, and he looked. A black Lincoln was parked at the bend in the dirt road half a mile out. The car sat where the rise gave the best line of sight to his barn. The morning sun caught its polished hood. It was a car that did not belong here. It was a car from a city. Two men stood beside it. He could not see their faces well at that distance. One was tall and thin, hatless, with a long coat against the morning chill that was too long a coat for the desert. The other was shorter, blockier, like a hydrant in a suit. They did not move. They stood. They watched the barn. Toby's stomach turned to cold water. He stepped back from the doorway. He pressed his shoulder against the rough wood of the inside wall, and he stood in the cool dimness, and he listened to his own breathing, and he made himself think. The lease is up. The men are supposed to be gone. They are not supposed to know about me. But they do. He waited. The Lincoln did not move for almost an hour. Then without a horn, without a shout, without a single sign of life, the engine turned over and the car backed slowly away down the dirt road. It crested the far rise. It vanished. Toby waited another 20 minutes. Then he walked out into the sunlight. There was something on the ground at the edge of the property. He had not seen it before. The Lincoln must have left it. He walked to it. He picked it up. It was an envelope, heavy paper, cream-colored, the kind of envelope a man pays for. There was no postmark. There was no name. Only one printed line on the front. To the new owner of the Renner parcel. Toby stood in his own dirt with the letter in his hand. The desert was perfectly silent around him. The only sound was the small, dry rasp of the paper as he turned it over. The return address was a law firm in Las Vegas, suite number 1900, representing a company called Meridian Holdings, LLC. He thought about his grandfather walking into a back office in Las Vegas in 2006 with cancer in his belly and a debt to a friend on his back. He looked down at the cream envelope in his hand. The fight, he understood, had already begun. He turned and walked back into his barn. Toby stood in the barn for a long time before he opened the cream envelope. The paper was cool against his fingers. He could feel the weight of the watermark when he held it up to the shaft of morning light coming through the roof. This was the kind of envelope a man like him was never supposed to touch. It was a piece of paper from another country, a country with marble lobbies and women behind glass desks and elevators that whispered when they moved. He sat down on the dirt floor with his back against the wall, the way he had read the letters the night before, and he tore the cream envelope along its top edge. The letter inside was one page. The letterhead said Meridian Holdings, LLC, in a font that looked like it had been carved into stone with a chisel. There was an address in Las Vegas. There was a phone number that started with 702. The body of the letter was 4 short paragraphs. It said that Meridian Holdings had become aware of the recent transfer of the parcel located at the address Toby was now sitting inside of. It said that Meridian was a development concern with significant interest in the high desert corridor. It said that Meridian was prepared to make a clean, generous offer for the property. $15,000. Cash. Wire transfer. Closing in 7 business days. A title agent in Barstow would handle the paperwork. Toby would not need to come to Las Vegas. He would not need to meet anyone. The signature on the deed transfer would be the only thing required of him. The offer, the letter said, was open for 30 days. The last paragraph was a single sentence. We trust you will recognize, given the condition of the structure and the limitations of the parcel, that this offer represents the property's full and fair market value. Toby read the letter twice. Then he set it on the floor beside him and looked at it. $15,000, plus the $10,000 in the box, plus the $21,000 in the bank. $46,000. A boy could live on $46,000 for a long time. A boy could rent an apartment in a real city. A boy could buy an old truck and a plane ticket and a bus pass. A boy could disappear. He thought about it for almost a full minute. Then he picked up the letter, walked to the open barn door and tore it in half. He tore each half in half. He tore those halves in half. He held the small pile of cream-colored squares in his palm, and he stepped out into the desert wind, and he opened his hand. The wind took the pieces. He watched them lift, scatter, and vanish into the brush. They were gone in 5 seconds. He stood there a long time after that, looking at the place where they had gone. The next morning, he started to dig. He had walked the 5 miles back to Amboy at first light. The desert was cold then, in a way no city boy expects a desert to be cold. His breath made small white clouds. He kept his hands in his pockets and the brass key against his thigh. He stopped first at the gas station. He bought another gallon of water. He bought a pencil. He asked the carved old man if there was a library in town. The old man pointed across the street. The Amboy Library was one room. It had been a Sunday school once. The pews were gone, but the high windows were still there, and the morning light came through them, yellow and slow. There were maybe 2,000 books on shelves that had been built by someone's uncle in 1962. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and silver-rimmed glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She looked up when the bell rang. "Well," she said. She had a voice like a careful kitchen knife. Not unkind, just sharp around the edges in a way that told you she would not waste a word. "You'd be the boy at the Renner place." Toby stopped just inside the door. "Yes, ma'am." "Edith Crowder," she said, and pointed at the small brass nameplate on her desk. "I run this library. I've run it since 1991. Everything in here is borrowable except me." "Toby." "Toby what?" "Tobias Renner." She nodded once slowly as if his last name had answered a question she had not asked out loud. She did not say what the question had been. She just folded her hands on the desk. "What can I do for you?" "I need books on building," Toby said. "Foundations, concrete work. And I need books on something called Walipini." For the first time, she blinked. "Walipini," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "That is a Bolivian word." "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a long moment over the top of her glasses. Toby felt the weight of being looked at by a woman who had been looking at boys her whole life and had learned to read them. Then she stood up. She came around the desk. She walked past him without a word and went to the back of the room to a shelf in the corner where the spines of the books were faded and the dust had gathered. She pulled down 4 books. She set them on a small wooden table by the window. "Pit Greenhouse," she said. "Sustainable construction, off-grid living." There was a fashion for it in the 70s. Most of these are from then. 40 years old, most of what's in them is still right. The earth doesn't change. Toby looked at the books. How much, he said. To borrow them is free. To take them home is your library card. You don't have one yet. Sit down. We'll fix that. He sat down. She fixed it. While she filled out the card, she did not look up. Your grandfather came in here once a month for 20 years, she said quietly. Same shelf, different book. Quietest man I ever met. He always tipped his cap when he left. I don't know what he was reading toward, but I know he was reading towards something. She slid the card across to him. Welcome to the library, Mr. Renner. He bought his shovel from the hardware store across the way. The hardware store had a hand-painted sign faded almost to white that read, Hollister and Son. Although there was no son there and never had been, the man behind the counter was tall and lean, with the long, hard face of a man who had been a young hard man once and had simply kept the bones. He had pale blue eyes that did not blink much. His hair was iron and white. His hands were the kind of hands Toby remembered from his grandfather. Big-knuckled, marked with old scars. Help you, the man said. It was not a question. Toby set his list on the counter. He had written it out at the gas station with the new pencil. Shovel, pickaxe, mattock, wheelbarrow, work gloves, heavy boots, 2 5-gallon water jugs, a roll of twine, a bundle of wooden stakes, a carpenter's level, a measuring tape 25 feet. The man read the list. He did not move his eyes from it for a long time. Then he looked up. What's your name, son? Tobias Renner. The man went still. It was not a flinch. It was not a gasp. It was something quieter and more total. Something behind his eyes simply stopped the way a clock stops. And for one slow second, he stood there with the list in his hand and looked at Toby like a man who had heard a voice from a room he had locked 30 years ago. Then the second was over. He folded the list. He put it on the counter. Silas Hollister, he said, pull your truck around back. I'll load you up. I don't have a truck, sir. Silas Hollister looked at him. You walk from the Renner place? Yes, sir. With a backpack? Yes, sir. Silas put both hands on the counter. He took a slow breath. He let it out. Boy, he said, you're going to need to rent a wheelbarrow before you buy one. And you're going to need a ride out there with the rest of this. Wait here. He walked out the back of the store. Toby heard a truck engine cough, then start, then settle into the slow, ragged idle of an old diesel. Silas came back through. He did not say a word. He just started loading. He drove Toby out to the barn in a 1986 Ford F250 that smelled of grease and tobacco and 40 years of honest sweat. He did not speak the whole way. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on the gear shift, and his eyes never left the road. And Toby sat in the passenger seat and watched the desert slide by and thought about Walt's words. There is a man in Amboy who owes me a life. When they got to the barn, Silas stopped the truck and looked at the building for a long time without getting out. He built this himself, Silas said. It was not a question. Yes, sir, Toby said. I think he did. Silas nodded once. He got out. He helped Toby unload. He did it quickly, professionally, the way a man unloads who has unloaded 1,000 trucks. He did not go inside the barn. When the last bag of nails was off the bed, Silas closed the tailgate and stood with one hand on it. Tomorrow morning, he said, I'll come by with the wheelbarrow and a rock bar. Your soil out here is caliche. You'll break a regular shovel before noon if you don't have a bar to break it up first. Sir, don't argue with me, son. I'm not asking. I'm telling. Pay me when you can. Pay me never if you can't. He got in the truck. He drove away. The dust hung in the air a long time after he was gone. Toby stood in his dirt and watched the road. He did not say what he was thinking because there was no one to say it to, but he was thinking that man knew my grandfather's name before I said it. The digging began. The first day was a war. He marked out the rectangle the way the book said. 20 feet by 4 feet, oriented along the south wall of the barn, the long axis running east to west, so the angled glass roof would face south and catch the low winter sun. He drove the wooden stakes at the corners with the back of the mattock. He ran the twine. Then he picked up the shovel, and he learned what caliche was. Caliche was the desert's idea of a joke. Below the loose top dust, the soil set up like a slab of bad concrete. The shovel rang when it hit. The shock ran up the handle into his wrists, his elbows, his shoulders. After 10 minutes, his palms were burning. After 30, the burning had become a wet, hot pain that meant blisters. After an hour, the blisters had broken and the gloves were sticking to his hands and the skin under them was raw. He kept going. By noon, he had cleared a hole the size of a doormat. It was 4 inches deep. He sat in the shadow of the barn and ate beef jerky and drank warm water and stared at his pathetic little hole and thought about Las Vegas, about a wire transfer, about $15,000 in 7 business days. Then he thought about Walt, sick and coughing, blood digging the bunker by hand in 2006, alone, with cancer in his belly. Toby got up. He picked up the shovel. He went back to work. The next morning, just after dawn, the F-250 came up over the rise. Silas climbed down. He brought a wheelbarrow, a rock bar that was almost as tall as Toby and twice as heavy, and a paper bag with 2 breakfast burritos in it. He set the burritos on the tailgate. He looked at Toby's hole. He looked at Toby's hands. He did not say anything about either. "Eat," he said. Toby ate. The burrito was the best food he had ever tasted in his life, and that was probably because the only food he had eaten in 3 days had been beef jerky. "Watch," Silas said. He took the rock bar. He stepped down into the hole. He raised the bar and brought it down, hard point first, into the caliche. There was a dry crack like a small bone breaking. He shifted his hands and brought it down again. Another crack. He worked the bar back and forth, and the slab broke up in chunks, and he stepped back. "Bar first," he said. "Shovel second. Don't fight the dirt with the wrong tool. Fight it with the right one." He set the bar down. He did not say goodbye. He got back in the truck and drove away. Toby stood there in the cool morning with grease on his fingers from the burrito and the rock bar in front of him. He thought, that man is helping me, and he is not telling me why. The days began to stack. Time in the desert worked differently. There were no weekdays out there. There were no weekends. There was the sun and the work and the small private cycles of a body learning what it was for. Toby woke at first light. He worked until the sun was directly overhead. He retreated to the shadow of the barn and read the books from Edith Crowder until the worst of the heat had passed. He worked again from late afternoon until he could not see the head of the shovel. Then he ate. Then he slept. The hole grew. His body changed. In the first week, his shoulders ached so badly at night that he could not lie on either side. By the second week, the ache had moved to a deeper place where it stopped hurting and started feeling like strength. The skin on his hands hardened into something that did not look like the skin of an 18-year-old boy anymore. It looked like the skin of a man who built things. His arms thickened, his back set, his face went brown. He had never owned his body before. He had borrowed it from the system. Now, dig by dig, he was buying it back. Silas came by twice a week. He never stayed long. He brought small things. A coil of rebar Toby would need. A bag of cement Toby had not yet asked for. A sandwich. He gave gruff one-line lessons. Tie your rebar at every cross with a twist of wire, not just the corners. Don't pour concrete after 3 in the afternoon. The heat will flash set it. Always wet your forms before you pour, or the wood will steal the water from the mix. He never took money. The first few times Toby tried to pay Silas just shook his head. "Pay me when the greenhouse is up," he said. "Not before." Edith Crowder came by once. She brought 4 more books and a thermos of iced tea. She walked the perimeter of the rectangle. She looked down into the pit, which was now 4 feet deep and growing. She did not say it was good or bad. She just said, "Your grandmother liked to grow tomatoes." Then she got back in her station wagon and drove away. Toby thought about a grandmother he could not remember. He thought about her holding hands with a man who would one day dig a bunker for criminals to save a friend. He went back to digging. The black Lincoln came back in the fourth week. He saw it from the bottom of the pit. He had been swinging the rock bar deep down where the air was cooler, where the dirt walls rose around him like the inside of a grave. He stopped because some quiet animal part of him noticed a sound that had not been there before. A low engine, far away, holding still. He climbed out of the pit. The Lincoln was parked at the same bend in the road as the first time, a different angle of sun on the hood. Two men beside it. They did not move toward him. They did not move away. They just stood like they had stood the first morning and watched. He did not wave. He did not call out. He picked up the shovel and went back into the pit and kept digging. After 40 minutes, the Lincoln backed away and disappeared. That night, when he climbed out and washed the dust off his face from the camp basin he had set up by the barn door, there was a second envelope pinned to the front of the barn. This one was not pinned with a thumbtack. It was pinned with a knife. A folding pocket knife with a black handle driven through the cream paper into the old wood of the door at chest height. The blade was rust-pitted on its spine, but the edge had been honed recently. It had been driven in hard enough that it took Toby both hands and most of his weight to pull it out. The letter inside was shorter than the first. The new offer was $20,000. The deadline was 30 days. The last paragraph used a phrase Toby had to read twice. We trust you will appreciate that further delay benefits no one, and that certain administrative remedies, including code enforcement and eminent domain proceedings, become available to entities such as ours when private negotiations fail to reach satisfactory conclusion. Toby stood in front of his barn with the knife in one hand and the letter in the other. He did not tear this one up. He folded it carefully. He put it inside the ammo box on top of his grandfather's letters. He put the knife in there too. He closed the box. He slid it back under the third floorboard. A man does not throw away evidence. A man saves it. He went back to the pit the next morning before dawn. A week after the knife in the pre-dawn dark, he found the door. He had been working back inside the barn that night, repairing a section of rotted floor near the far wall. He had been doing it because he could not sleep, and he had been doing it because the rotted board had begun to bow under his weight when he walked across it. He set his weight on it to test it. The board cracked. His leg went through up to the thigh. He pulled himself out, swearing softly, and looked into the hole he had made. He froze. The hole did not show him dirt. The hole showed him a set of concrete steps. He sat back on the floor of the barn and looked at the dark space below for a long time. He did not move. He did not breathe loudly. The barn was perfectly silent around him. He went and got the flashlight he had bought at the gas station. He came back. He shone the beam down into the hole. The steps were narrow and steep. They had been poured carefully. The concrete was 30 years younger than the wood of the barn floor. It was clean and gray, and it ran straight down for about 10 feet to a small landing where the beam caught the dull, dark gleam of a steel door. The door had a heavy, modern handle and a deadbolt mechanism. Walt's letter had said the bunker was sealed from the outside, that the men had used it for 20 years and then closed it and gone, that the diagram in the box was for the Walipini, not for the bunker, that the bunker was not Toby's problem. It was a buried sin. Toby looked down at the steel door. The door was not closed. It was open, just an inch. A thin black line of air ran along the frame. Somebody had been down there, recently. He sat in the dirt of his barn at 4 a.m. with a flashlight in his hand, and he understood all at once the whole shape of the thing. The men in the Lincoln were not real estate buyers. The lease was up. They were supposed to be gone, but they were not gone. Whatever they had been keeping in his grandfather's bunker for 20 years, they were still keeping it. And now somebody who was not them owned the land above their heads. A boy, a dumb foster kid with a shovel. They wanted him gone. They wanted him gone before he found this door. He was going to find out what was on the other side of it. He went back to the gas station that morning. He waited until the old man unlocked the doors at 6. He bought two things: a disposable film camera with a built-in flash and a small tube of clear silicone caulk. He waited until late afternoon, the worst heat of the day, the time when men in Las Vegas would not drive out to the desert because they liked their air conditioning. He went down the steps. He went down them slowly with the flashlight in his teeth and the camera in one hand, and he kept the other hand on the wall because his knees were not entirely steady. He pushed the steel door. It moved silently. They had kept the hinges oiled. The bunker inside was bigger than he had expected, maybe 20 feet by 30, concrete floor, concrete walls, concrete ceiling, all done by Walt's hands 20 years ago. A single bare light fixture hung from the center of the ceiling, but the bulb was out. The flashlight beam swept the room. There were stacks of plastic-wrapped bricks along one wall. They were the size of paperback books. They were wrapped tight in clear plastic, and then again in heavy black tape. He did not know what was in them. He did not need to know what they were. There were boxes along another wall, banker's boxes. He opened one. It was full of paper, ledgers, handwritten columns of names and numbers. He took photographs. There was a small steel cabinet bolted to the floor. The cabinet was unlocked. Inside were 3 handguns neatly oiled in a small stack of United States passports in different names with different photographs, and what Toby assumed were different lies. He photographed everything. In the back corner on a small wooden table sat a coffee mug with a 1/4 inch of cold coffee still in the bottom of it. Somebody had been down here within the last day or two. His skin went cold. He took the picture of the coffee mug. He took 2 more just to be sure. He backed out of the bunker. He pulled the steel door closed to exactly the angle it had been. He climbed the steps. He came up through the hole in the floor. He took the silicone caulk. He ran a careful invisible bead along the inside edge of the floorboard he had broken. He pressed the board back into place. He kicked dust over it. He scattered loose hay from the corner. He stood back. The floor looked like the floor again. He took the disposable camera. He hid it in the bottom of his backpack under the sock with the hole in it. He did not tell Silas. He did not tell Edith. He did not tell anybody. Some things a man carries by himself until he is sure. That night he opened the manila envelope a final time. He had been saving it. There had been one thing in the box he had not yet read, a second small sealed envelope, white, no markings on the outside, that had been at the very bottom of the ammo box beneath the bundle of letters and the cash in the diagram. He had felt it the first night and known it was there, and he had not opened it because he had been afraid of what it was. Now, with photographs of an active bunker hidden under his floor and a knife scar in the front door of his barn, he was not afraid of any envelope. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a Polaroid recent, not older than 2 or 3 years. It showed a woman in her early 40s standing in a small vegetable garden. She was wearing a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands in the picture were dirty. She was holding a tomato. She was smiling. It was the kind of smile that happens to a person when nobody is asking them to smile. He did not recognize her at first. The woman in the picture looked clean. She looked rested. She looked like a person, not a problem. Then he saw the eyes. He sat down on the dirt floor of the barn. He held the Polaroid in both hands. He looked at his mother for the first time in 8 years. There was a folded note tucked behind the photograph. Walt's handwriting, but smaller and tighter than the letters. Written late, written quickly, written by a man who knew his time was nearly done. Tobias, this is your mother. Her name is still Maeve. She is, as of the time I write this, 14 months sober. She is in a residential program in Bakersfield called Greenfield House. She has been there for over a year. She did the work, son. She did it without me and without you and without any reason but herself. She does not know I had this picture taken. The director of the program is an old friend of mine. He sent it to me because I asked, And because I told him I was dying and I wanted to know my daughter's face one more time before I went. I am writing this to tell you that she is alive, that she is trying, that she has, as of this writing, a new life that is small and quiet in her own. Do not go to her son. Not yet. She is not strong enough yet, and neither are you. Build first. Build yourself. Build the greenhouse. Make your own hands solid and your own back straight. Earn your own ground. When you are ready and only, then you will know. You will know. Trust your gut, Tobias. It is your grandmother's gut and mine, and it does not lie to those who listen. The photograph is yours. Keep it. Look at it on the hard nights. Remember that the woman in this picture is not the woman who lost you. The woman who lost you is dead. This one is the one who fought her way back. I love you both. I always did. Walt. Toby sat in the barn with the photograph for a long time. He did not cry. He had not cried since he was 9 years old on the night his mother had locked him in a closet for 6 hours while she was sick on the bathroom floor, and he had cried then so loudly and for so long that he had decided the next morning when nobody had come that crying was a thing that had used itself up in him. He had not done it again. He did not do it now. But he sat there a long time and he looked at his mother's face and at the tomato in her dirty hand and at the way she was smiling like a person, and somewhere very deep in him, a small, hard knot of 8 years of bad sleep loosened. She was alive. She was trying. He got up. He put the photograph carefully into the back of his grandfather's last letter. He folded everything closed. He put it back in the box. He had work to do. The harassment got worse after the second offer expired. He woke one morning to find that his rainwater collection system, the simple gutter and cistern setup he had jury-rigged off the side of the barn, had been smashed. The cistern, a 500-gallon plastic tank he had bought in Barstow with Silas's help, lay split open in the dirt. The gutters had been pulled down. The downspout had been twisted into a useless tangle. 2 days after that, when he was on his way back from town, he found 3 of the polycarbonate panels he had stacked under a tarp by the barn cracked all the way through. Somebody had taken a tire iron to them in the night. A week after that, Edith Crowder's old station wagon parked behind the library on her day off had its tires cut, 3 of them, all on the driver's side. A note had been left on the windshield. The note was one line. The note said, "Friends of the boy will be friends of his trouble." She brought him the note herself. She drove out in a borrowed truck. She handed it to him without comment. He read it. He looked up at her. "I'm sorry," he said. She made a face. "Tobias Renner," she said, "you did not cut my tires. The man who cut my tires is the man who is sorry. He just doesn't know it yet." She got back in the borrowed truck and drove away. He sat in the dust of his barn for a long time after that. The Polaroid of his mother is in his shirt pocket against his chest. He had carried it there every day since he had found it. He thought about the offer. $20,000. He thought about the bunker under his feet. He thought about the cup with the cold coffee. He thought about the men who would cut a 60-something librarian's tires to send a message to a teenager. The next time he was in town, he asked Silas for a favor. He did not ask the big favor. He did not ask the question he wanted to ask. He just asked the small favor. "Mr. Hollister," he said in the back of the hardware store where the boxes of bolts were stacked, "I need to borrow some heavy fishing line, the kind they use for marlin." Silas Hollister looked at him over a box of half-inch carriage bolts. "You fishing, son?" "No, sir." "What for, then?" Toby met his eyes. He did not look away. "I'm setting traps." Silas held his gaze for a long second. Then he turned around, walked into the back of the store, and came back with a spool of 120-pound braided line. "This is the good stuff," he said. "It's also $19. You can pay me when the greenhouse is up." He handed it over. Then very quietly he said, "If they come, son, don't aim for a man's chest, aim for his knee. A knee will stop a man and not put him in a grave." He turned away. He did not say anything else. Toby walked out of the hardware store with the spool of line in his hand and the brass key against his thigh, and a cold, clean place beginning to form in the center of his chest. He had a bunker under his floor full of evidence. He had a mother in a vegetable garden in Bakersfield. He had a grandfather who had loved him every day. He had men in a Lincoln who thought he was a foster kid with a shovel. He had a barn. He had $4 worth of dirt that not nobody was going to take from him. And one afternoon, while he was straightening a section of bent rebar inside the cool shadow of the barn, Silas came by with a rock bar and a thermos of coffee, and Silas left both on the tailgate and went inside the barn to use the camp stool. Toby went into the truck cab to grab the thermos. The driver's side door of the F250 had a small cubby, the kind older trucks have, just big enough for a registration card and a roll of mints. The cubby was open. The light inside the cab caught something dull and gold at the back of the cubby. It was a medal. Toby reached in. He picked it up. It was warm from the sun. The medal was a bronze star. The ribbon was faded but clean. The bronze was tarnished but cared for. On the back, engraved in fine, careful letters, was a name and a date. R. Hollister, Desert Storm, 1991. Toby stood in the open door of the truck and held the medal in his palm. The desert wind moved softly around him. The sun was going down behind the mountains. The light on the medal was the color of honey. He understood. He had understood in pieces for weeks. The look on the man's face when Toby said his name. The way he came twice a week and did not take money. The way he had said, aim for the knee. But now he understood in one piece. He closed his hand around the medal. He stood there a long time. Inside the barn, he could hear the small, ordinary sounds of a 60-year-old man pouring himself a cup of coffee from a thermos. Toby put the medal back in the cubby exactly where it had been. He closed the door of the truck softly. He went back into the barn and took the thermos and said thank you, and Silas said you're welcome, and they stood together in the cool dark of the barn and watched the sun finish going down without saying another word. Toby did not say what he knew. Not yet. A man does not call another man out of a hiding place he has earned the right to. A man waits. A man waits for the moment that calls the truth out of the dark on its own. That moment came 3 nights later. The sound that woke Toby was the sound of a vehicle engine cutting out at the far end of the dirt road. A vehicle coasting in neutral engine off, rolling slowly on the soft sand toward the barn. Toby was on the thin cot he had set up against the back wall of the barn. He was awake instantly. He had been waiting for a sound like that for 2 weeks. He had set certain things up for a sound like that. He had walked the property in the daylight 100 times, mapping every gully and rise, every loose board and hidden trip, every place a man could come from and every place a man could not. He sat up. He pulled on his boots. He did not turn on a light. He picked up the rock bar. It was leaning against the wall by his cot. He went to the barn door. The night outside was clean and black. The moon was a quarter full. The desert was silver. He could see the dark shape of a sedan, lights off, sitting 200 yards out at the bend in the road. 2 figures were walking toward the barn on foot. One was tall, one was short. Both were carrying something in their right hands. Toby took a slow breath. He stepped back into the dark of the barn. He let the moonlight fill the doorway behind him the way an actor lets the stage light fall onto an empty mark. He waited. The brass key was warm against his thigh. The Polaroid of his mother was in his shirt pocket. His grandfather's words were in the bottom of his chest like a lit pilot light. Be better. The 2 figures got closer. 40 yards, 20, 10. Toby closed his hand around the rock bar. He was 18 years old in his own barn on his own dirt, and he had built every stone of this moment with his own hands. He was ready. The first one through the door was the short one, Brumlow. He moved the way a man moves who has done this kind of work before. Quiet, low, hand out in front of him like a man feeling for furniture in a strange room. He had a flashlight, but he was not using it. He was letting his eyes adjust. He was a professional. He was not a professional enough. Toby had walked the inside of his barn in the dark 300 times in the last 4 weeks. He knew where every rusted nail stood up out of the floor. He knew where the rotted boards sagged and where the new board he had laid yesterday rang firm. He knew the exact distance from the doorway to the heavy oak post that supported the south side of the loft. He had measured it, 11 feet. He knew where the fishing line was. He had strung the 120-pound braided marlin line at ankle height between two old hay hooks he had screwed into the bottoms of the wall studs that morning. The line ran across the inside of the doorway at exactly 6 inches above the floor. It was invisible in the dark. It was strong enough to land a fish bigger than a man. Brumlow stepped through the doorway. His ankle caught the line. The line did not break. Brumlow went down hard, face first with the heavy crack a body makes when a body forgets how to be a body for a second. The thing in his right hand, which Toby could see now in the moonlight bouncing off the loft, was a small red gas can. It went bouncing across the dirt floor. The smell of gasoline filled the barn. Brumlow rolled swearing. He never made it to his feet. Toby was already there. He had moved the moment the line caught. He had not moved fast. He had moved the way Silas had been showing him for a month to move when you swing a rock bar. Slow at the start, heavy through the middle, honest at the end. He swung the bar low. He swung it for the knee. The bar hit the side of Brumlow's left knee with a sound that Toby would remember for the rest of his life. It was the sound of a piece of green wood splitting in cold weather. Brumlow made a noise that was not a curse and not a scream, but something in between the noise a man makes when his body learns that something inside it is not going to be the same again. He went down. He did not get up. Toby stepped over him. The tall one, Crane, was in the doorway now. He had a flashlight up. The beam swept the barn, found Brumlow on the floor, found the gasoline, darkening the dirt around him, found Toby standing in the middle of it all with the rock bar in both hands. Crane's other hand came up. The gun was small and short-barreled, and the sort of thing a man in a long coat keeps where his ribs end. Toby did not stop moving. He had been told once by an old man in a foster home a long time ago that a man with a gun in his hand is a man who has decided not to use his fists, and that meant a man with a gun in his hand was for 1/10 of a second slower than a man without one. Toby threw the rock bar. He did not throw it at Crane. He threw it at the flashlight. The bar caught the light dead on. The lens shattered. The bulb went out. The barn fell into deep moonlight, and Toby was already moving sideways into the shadow of the loft post, and Crane was firing. The gun was small. The sound was not. It cracked through the barn 3 times in fast succession. The first round went into the loft. The second went through the open door behind him. The third struck a feed bucket Toby had hung from a nail 2 days before, exactly head high, exactly where a panicked man would aim if he was aiming at a movement that was not really there. The bucket made a flat metallic sound and swung. Crane fired one more time at the bucket. That was 4 rounds. Toby was behind him by then. He had come around the post in the dark. He had crossed the dirt floor with his feet making no sound because he had spent 4 weeks learning where the dirt floor was loud and where it was quiet. He was on Crane's blind side, low the way a smaller man takes a bigger man, and he hit Crane behind the right knee with his shoulder. Crane went down on one leg. Toby took the gun. He took it the way Silas had told him once, to take a tool out of a man's hand who was holding it wrong. From the back, 2 hands, up and away from the man's body in a single motion before the man could close his grip. The gun came free. Toby stepped back. He held it pointed at the dirt floor between them because he did not yet know whether he was the kind of person who could hold a gun pointed at a man, and because the question of whether he was that kind of person did not have to be answered tonight. Crane was on his knees in the gasoline-soaked dirt. The barn was very quiet. The bucket was still swinging on its nail with a small, dry creak. Brumlow was making a low animal sound from the corner where his knee had stopped working. "Stand up," Toby said. Crane stood up, slowly. "Walk." He walked. Toby moved him with the gun. He moved him out of the gasoline, away from the door, into the back corner of the barn where the rotten board over the bunker stairs was. Crane watched the gun the whole time. His face was pale in the moonlight. His mouth was open a little. Lie down. Crane lay down, face down, hands behind his head. Toby took the marlin line, the same line that had taken Brumlow's ankle. He cut a length of it with the pocket knife. He tied Crane's wrists. He did it the way a man who has been a Boy Scout once knows to do, because nobody had ever been a Boy Scout in his life. But he had read a book about knots from Edith Crowder's library 2 weeks ago, and the book had said that the constrictor knot was the knot a man used when he wanted a thing to stay tied. He tied a constrictor knot. He went to Brumlow. He tied Brumlow's wrists too. Brumlow did not fight him. Brumlow was beyond fighting. Toby stood up. His hands were shaking now. They had not shaken during. They were shaking now. He let them. He let his body do what a body does after a body has been asked to be more than a body. He breathed in and he breathed out, and he counted in his head the way the buzzing fluorescent had counted in Lorraine Pruitt's office a lifetime ago. By 12, his hands had quieted. He walked out of the barn. He walked the 5 miles to Amboy in the dark. He used the gas station payphone. He dialed 911. He said his name. He said his address. He said that 2 men had broken into his barn, and that one of them had fired a handgun, and that he had subdued them both, and that they were now tied and waiting on his property. He said that the men were associates of a Las Vegas company called Meridian Holdings. He said that he had reason to believe the men were planning to commit arson on the property. He said he would wait at the gas station for the deputies. He hung up. The carved old man behind the counter looked at him over the rim of his coffee cup and did not say a word. He waited. The first sheriff's cruiser came up the highway 40 minutes later, lights off out of courtesy to the desert. By dawn, there were 3 more cruisers, an ambulance for Brumlow's knee, and a tow truck for the black sedan the men had left at the bend in the road. By 8 in the morning, Toby was sitting in a folding chair just inside the open barn door, drinking a paper cup of coffee a deputy had handed him, and watching the sun come up over a land he had earned the right to stand on. Silas Hollister's truck came up the road at 8:15. The deputies waved him through. Silas had been coming to this property twice a week for a month, and the deputies in San Bernardino County tend to know whose truck is whose. He parked. He climbed out. He looked at the cruisers. He looked at the ambulance pulling away with Brumlow inside it. He looked at the gun in a deputy's plastic evidence bag sitting on the hood of the lead cruiser. Then he looked at Toby. He walked across the dirt to where Toby was sitting. He did not say anything. He pulled up another folding chair. He sat down beside him. Toby reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the Bronze Star. He had taken it from the cubby of Silas's truck the day before when Silas had been inside the barn with the thermos. He had taken it carefully, and he had carried it in his pocket all night, and the bronze was warm from his body now. He set it on the small wooden crate between their 2 chairs. The metal lay there in the morning light. Silas looked at it. For a long time, neither man said anything. The deputies were finishing up at the far end of the barn, marking evidence, talking quietly into their radios. The sun climbed. The shadow of the barn shortened on the ground. Finally, Silas spoke. "How long have you known?" "Since I saw it in your truck, 3 days ago." "Hell of a thing not to say." "I didn't think it was mine to say first." Silas closed his eyes for a second. He breathed out a breath he had been holding, Toby thought, for about 30 years. "Your grandfather," he said, "told you about me in those letters. He told me a man owed him a life. He didn't tell me your name." "That sounds like him." Silas reached out. He picked up the metal. He turned it over in his fingers the way a man turns a thing over that he had lost a long time ago and has now found again. "Ray Hollister," he said. "That's the name on it. That's the name they put on the records. That's the name your grandfather knew. After he died, I changed it for the world. I didn't change it on the metal because the metal wasn't about the world. It was about the men who weren't coming home." He set the metal down. In 2006, he said, I was a dead man. Your grandfather got in his truck and he drove to a parking lot in north of Las Vegas, and he stood between me and four men with bats. And he made them an offer that no sane man would make because he had loved my brother in arms more than he had loved his own future. He bought my life with 20 years of his own. He looked at Toby. When he passed in 2018, I owed him a debt that I could not pay him. So I came out here. I bought the hardware store off old Pete Mason for cash. I changed my name on the new paperwork. I put my old name in a drawer under a coffee mug. And I waited. For me. For you. For the day a renter walked into my store with the look of his grandfather's mouth and his grandmother's stubborn jaw. I told myself if the boy comes, I will be there. I will not push. I will not crowd him. I will be a man with a hammer and a sandwich, and I will let him do his own work because a debt repaid by stealing a man's work is no debt repaid at all. Toby looked at him. He had not slept. His knuckles were scraped. His shirt smelled like gasoline. There was a small splinter of wood from the butt of the gun stuck in the side of his palm. He had killed nobody. He had saved his own life. He had been 18 years old when this morning began, and he was 18 years old still, and he was in a quiet, hard place inside himself, finally for the first time a man. You came out here every 2 days for a month, Toby said, and you didn't tell me. No. Why not? Silas looked at the metal on the crate. He looked at the barn. He looked at the dirt. He looked at the rising sun. Because the work was yours, son, not mine. Toby did not answer for a while. Then he picked up the metal. He held it out handle first, the way a man hands another man back his own thing. It's yours, Toby said. Silas took it. He put it in his pocket. Your grandfather, he said, was the best man I ever knew. He stood up. He clapped a hand on Toby's shoulder. He left it there. The hand was heavy and dry and steady. Then he walked back to his truck without another word because some kinds of saying are done with the back of a man's hand on a man's shoulder and not with the front of a man's mouth. Toby drove down to Barstow that afternoon. He drove in the passenger seat of Silas's F250. He had never driven a car in his life. Silas drove. The metal was back in the cubby of the door where it had been all along. Garrett Hollister kept his law office on the second floor of a building on Main Street in Barstow that had once been a feed store. The building still smelled faintly of old grain. Garrett was in his early 40s. He had his uncle's pale eyes and his uncle's long jaw, and none of his uncle's silence. He talked the way a country lawyer talks. Slow on the front end, fast on the back end, and clean all the way through. Toby spread the photographs out on Garrett's desk. The bunker, the bricks, the ledgers, the passports, the handguns, the coffee mug. Garrett looked at them for a long time. He did not whistle. He did not make a face. He just looked. Then he looked at Toby. Son, he said, you know what you've got here? I think so. You've got a federal RICO case. You've got conspiracy. You've got drug trafficking. You've got document fraud. You've got, depending on what's in those bankers' boxes, 20 years of enterprise crime. And you've got the active scene of a witness intimidation campaign, which is itself a federal crime against the property owner, which is you. And we have you on a 911 call, which I have a copy of, which I just had the sheriff's office release to me, in which two professionals attempted to commit arson on your property and were instead lawfully detained by you in an act of self-defense. He folded his hands. Mr. Renner, I am going to take this case for you. I am not going to take it for money. I am going to take it pro bono, which means free, which means you will not pay me a dime, because what you have here is too important to be a question of money. Are we agreed? We're agreed. Then tomorrow morning, you and I, we drive to the United States Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and we hand this whole thing to the FBI. Will they take it? Garrett smiled. It was the first time Toby had seen the man smile. Son, he said, they will fall on this like a man falls on a steak after Lent. The drive to Los Angeles took 4 hours. Toby slept for most of it in the passenger seat of Garrett's old Bronco. He had not slept in 2 days. When they came down out of the mountains and the great pale haze of the city spread out below them, Toby woke up. He looked out the window. 5 weeks ago, he had ridden a Greyhound in the opposite direction with everything he owned in a backpack, and he had thought he was leaving this city forever. He had not been leaving. He had been gathering himself. The FBI agents who took the meeting were older than Toby had expected. The lead agent was a woman in her 50s named Halverson. She had the face of someone who had spent 30 years watching men lie to her and had developed in self-defense a face that was kin and tired in equal parts. She listened to Toby tell the story for almost 3 hours. She did not interrupt once. When he was done, she asked 12 specific questions. He answered all 12. She asked 4 more. He answered those. At the end, she closed her notebook. "Mr. Renner," she said, "you are going to want to stay out of your barn for a little while. We will arrange for you to be relocated for 48 hours. After that, we will move on the bunker, and from that point forward, the world is going to be a different shape than the one you walked in here in. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "You did the right thing." "Yes, ma'am." She paused. "And Mr. Renner?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your grandfather did the right thing, too." At the end, Toby's eyes burned. He nodded. He did not trust his voice. The bunker raid happened on a Wednesday morning. It was not on the news that day. It was on the news the next day and the day after that, and for the next 2 weeks. The story moved from the local Barstow paper to the Los Angeles Times to CNN, and somewhere along the way, the headline writers found the angle that made it national. A boy, a barn, a dead grandfather's deal. A senator from Sacramento whose name was on 3 of the ledger entries. The senator resigned within 10 days. Crane was caught at the San Diego border 2 weeks after the raid. He had been trying to drive into Tijuana with $38,000 in cash and a duffel bag full of forged passports, and he had picked the wrong morning to do it because his face had been on the front page of the Union Tribune that day. The border agent recognized him before he reached the booth. He did not get out of his car under his own power. Brumlow, with a shattered knee, took the deal. He had been Meridian's California operations man for 9 years. He gave them on tape in exchange for a reduced sentence the names of 14 other men, 3 judges, 2 sheriffs, and the structure of the entire shell company, architecture above him. Meridian Holdings dissolved by court order 4 months after Toby walked into Halverson's office. 41 people went to prison. The senator was one of them. Toby learned all of this slowly through Garrett, through Halverson, through phone calls he took, standing in the cool corner of Silas Hollister's hardware store, where the only phone in town that was not a payphone hung on the wall by the back door. He did not give any interviews. He stayed in his barn. He went back to digging. The Wallapini came up out of the desert the way a thing comes up out of a long sleep. He poured the foundation in late spring. He did it with Silas's help, but it was Toby's mix in Toby's forms, in Toby's hands on the screed board. The concrete went in clean. He let it cure under wet burlap for 10 days the way the book said. He stripped the forms. The walls stood up out of the pit straight and true. He framed the south wall in May. He insulated the north wall using the back of the barn itself as the heat sink the way Walt's diagram had shown. He bolted the steel ridge beam in place on a windless afternoon when even Silas had been impressed enough to grunt one short syllable of approval. He laid the polycarbonate roof panels in June on a long Saturday with Silas on one side of the ridge and himself on the other, and Edith Crowder, who had brought a thermos of lemonade and a folding chair, watching from the shade of the barn and pretending she was not watching. When the last panel was screwed down, Toby climbed down off the roof, and he stood at the edge of the pit with the desert wind in his hair, and he looked. The Wallapini sat in the earth like a long, low gem. The polycarbonate caught the afternoon light and held it. Inside, the air was already cool and still and waiting. He had built it, all of it, with the money of men who were now in federal custody. He had washed their dirty money clean with his own sweat and his own blisters and his own hours, and the work of it had passed through him like water through a clean filter, and the building stood there now with no debt left in it. It was his. It was Walt's. It was honest. In July, he hauled in the soil, 6 pickup loads of compost from a nursery in Barstow, 3 loads of clean topsoil. He mixed it in by hand. He built the raised beds out of cedar boards Silas had cut for him in the back of the hardware store. He laid drip lines from the new 1,500-gallon cistern he had bought properly this time with a poured concrete pad and a steel cage around it. On the 1st of August, he planted the first seeds. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, basil, a small row of pole beans at the back. Things any man could grow. Things any grandmother in the country might have grown in a back porch box in 1962. He planted them carefully, one row at a time. He watered them. He went back to his cot in the barn, and he tried not to look at the seed beds for a few days, the way a man tries not to look too often at a thing he loves, because looking too often will not make it grow. On the 8th day, he went down into the Walipini at first light, the way he had every morning for a week, and he stopped at the bottom of the steps. There in the dark, damp soil of the second bed, in a thin, wavering line he had drawn with his fingers 8 days before, were the green specks. Lettuce. Tiny. Brave. No bigger than the head of a sewing pin, but green. Alive. Toby knelt down on the damp earth of his greenhouse floor. He put his face close to the bed. He looked at the small green specks. For the first time in 9 years, he cried. He did not cry the way a child cries. He cried the way a man cries who has been told for a long time that crying is finished in him, and who finds out on a quiet morning in his own dirt that the thing inside him that cries has only been waiting. He cried for Walt, who had dug a hole to hide a sin, and for Walt's grandson, who had dug it deeper to plant a life. He cried for his grandmother, whose tomato hands he had only seen in a Polaroid. He cried for the boy in the foster home who had stopped crying at 9. He cried until he was empty, and then he sat back on his heels in the soft, cool earth, and he wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and he was not empty after all. He was full. He sat there a long time. Then he stood up. He climbed the steps. He walked across the barn. He went out into the desert sun. He had one more thing to do. The settlement check from the Department of Justice arrived in September. It was the result of the RICO civil forfeiture proceedings against the assets of Meridian Holdings, of which Toby Renner had been a documented victim of an active intimidation and arson conspiracy. The check was for $75,000. It was made out to him by the United States Treasury. Garrett Hollister handed it to Toby across the desk in the second floor of the old feed store building in Barstow. "Son," Garrett said, "it's the cleanest money you'll ever hold in your life." Toby looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it in half and he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. And the next morning, with the cashier's check still in that pocket and the Polaroid of his mother in the breast pocket of his shirt, he asked Silas if he could borrow the F-250. For what? Bakersfield. Silas did not ask why. He handed Toby the keys. "You drive easy, son. The clutch sticks in second." Toby drove out of Amboy that morning at first light. He was 18 years and 4 months old. He had taught himself to drive on the dirt road behind his barn over the last 2 weeks in slow, patient circles with Silas in the passenger seat, saying nothing and shaking his head only once. He had a license. Garrett had walked him through it. He drove west across the desert and up over the Tehachapi Mountains and down into the long, flat valley where Bakersfield sat in a haze of summer dust. Greenfield House was a low brick building on a quiet street near the old county hospital. There was a vegetable garden along the south side, just like in the picture. Tomato cages, a row of squash, a wooden bench under a young walnut tree. A woman in a faded denim shirt was kneeling in the bean row pulling weeds. Toby parked the truck across the street. He sat in the cab a long time. The engine was off. The cab grew warm. He held the Polaroid in his hand and he looked at the woman in the garden and he looked at the woman in the photograph, and they were the same woman. She was older than the picture. There was more gray in her hair. The lines beside her mouth had deepened. Her hands were the same hands. They were busy in the dirt the way hands are busy when they are not busy with the wrong things. He got out of the truck. He walked across the street. He stopped at the low chain-link gate that opened onto the garden path. The woman did not look up at first. She was working a stubborn weed out of the bean row. She got it. She tossed it into a bucket beside her. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist and she looked up. She saw him. Her face went through several things. None of them were the things a stranger's face does. They were the things a face does that has been waiting without permission for a particular face for a long time. Tobias, she said. She said it not the way a stranger says a name. She said it the way a mother says it in a kitchen at 6 in the morning before school when she has said the name 1,000 times and is saying it once more, and the saying is half greeting and half prayer. He had not heard her say his name in 9 years. He could not speak for a moment. When he could, he said, "Mom, so that was all." She put down the weed bucket. She stood up. Her knees were stiff. She brushed dirt from the front of her shirt. She did not run to him. He did not run to her. There was no movie about this part. They stood there at the gate with 3 feet of dust and chain link between them, and they looked at each other, and she said, "I was hoping you would come." "Grandpa wrote me a letter," he said. "He wrote me one too." "You got one. Director Mitchell brought it to me about a year ago. He said your grandfather had asked him to give it to me when I had been clean for 2 years. I had been clean for 2 years 3 weeks before." She wiped her hand on her shirt. She held it out. "Tobias," she said, "I am not who I was. I am also not who I should have been. I am only who I am right now. I am asking you if you are able to know me as that person and not the other one." He looked at her hand. It was a worker's hand, dirt under the nails, calluses on the palm, the ghost of an old needle scar in the inside crook of the elbow that he could see when she reached out, but it was a ghost, not a wound. He took her hand. He did not let go for a long time. She drove back with him to Amboy 3 weeks later. She had spoken with Director Mitchell. She had spoken with her sponsor. She had spoken with her counselor. She had done it the way the program had taught her to do it. She had not made the decision in one afternoon. She brought a single duffel bag. Everything she owned was in it. She rode in the passenger seat of the F2500. She did not talk much on the drive. She watched the desert come up around them, and at one point when the Joshua trees began, she put her hand flat against the glass of the window for a second, and she said, "I always loved these. Your grandmother said they were trees that prayed." Toby did not answer. He just drove. He took her up the dirt road at sunset. The barn came into view at the top of the rise. The Wally Peony caught the last of the light along its long roof, and the polycarbonate burned with a cool, clean color, the color of held water. The barn behind it stood straight on its repaired walls with new red paint along the trim that Toby had put up over a long Sunday in August. The old Joshua tree by the property line threw a long shadow. Maeve looked at it. She put one hand to her mouth. She did not cry. She had cried enough in her life in dark rooms for bad reasons. She did not cry now in this good light for a good one, but her hand stayed at her mouth a long time. Silas was waiting on the steps of the barn when they came up. He had brought a folding table. He had set it under the old oak by the side of the barn in the shade. There was a checkered cloth on it. There were 3 plates. There was a small ceramic dish of tomatoes, sliced salted, the first ripe tomatoes from the Wally Peony, the ones Toby had cut that morning with his own hands. Silas stood up when they got out of the truck. He took off his ball cap. "Mrs. Renner," he said. "Maeve, please." "Maeve, I knew your father. I figured. He spoke of you every time he came in my store. Every single time. For 12 years. Maeve's eyes filled. She looked at the table. She looked at the tomatoes. She looked at the barn and the Wallapini and the man her son had become and the old cap in the hands of the man who had loved her father. She said very quietly, "Thank you." They sat down at the table. Toby brought out the last of his grandfather's letters, the very last one. The one Walt had written in October of 2018, a few days before he died. He had read it 100 times. He read it now out loud for the first time in the warm red light of a desert evening, with his mother on his right and Silas on his left, in the barn standing behind them, and the Walipini glowing in front of them. He read the part about the deal. He read the part about the bunker. He read the part about the Walipini. He read the part about the harder right. He read the last line, "Be better." He folded the letter. He put it back in its envelope. He sat in the long red light. The desert was cooling. A small wind moved across the property from the south. The first stars were just beginning to come out of the high blue ceiling of the world. He looked at his mother. He looked at the man who had been a sergeant in 1991, and a name on a medal in a drawer, and a stranger in a hardware store, and now finally simply a friend. He thought about Walt. He thought about the way the world had handed him a piece of dirt in the Mojave for $4, and how a piece of dirt had turned with work and time, and somebody's love left like a candle in a window into a place, a home, his. He picked up a slice of tomato. He held it in his fingers a moment. The juice ran down his thumb. The salt was bright on the dark red flesh. He thought my grandfather dug a hole to hide a sin. I dug it deeper, and I planted life on top of it. He thought that is what he meant. That is what better looks like. It does not look like perfect. It does not look like clean. It looks like a man with dirty hands and a clean conscience sitting at a wooden table at sunset with the people he loves eating the food he grew on top of the wreck he turned into a home. He ate the tomato. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. Around him, the desert was settling into its long blue evening, and the Walipini was breathing its slow earth's warm breath under the new glass, and the barn was holding its old wood quiet against the coming night, and the $4 parcel he had walked onto 5 months ago, with a backpack and a brass key, was in every way, the word means anything at all, his. He looked across the table at his mother. She was watching him with a face he did not yet have a word for. He thought in time he would learn the word. He had time. For the first time in his life, he had time. He raised his glass of cold water from the cistern. Silas raised his. Maeve raised hers. They drank, the three of them, in the dust of the Renner place, on a piece of ground that had cost a dead man 20 years and a young man 5 months, and a family 3 generations of grief, and the stars came out one by one over the barn, and the long, hard work of the long, hard year was for one quiet hour at sunset behind them. A boy had walked off a Greyhound bus into a town that was not a town, with a key in his pocket and nothing in his name. He had become a man. He had built a place. He had brought his mother home. He had been better. His grandfather, he thought, would have been proud.